All right, thank you, Yuhua, for the nice introduction. I'm not very sure. I'm going to hold in the office for 17 years, and I really cannot break that record. Yes, first I must say that it's really a great honor for me to talk about Charles here in this party. And first, let me set the record straight. And I must say, I probably cannot call myself a pioneer here. Let me tell you why. So I just noticed that I didn't know this actually. Charles graduated from college in 1971. And I have to confess, I graduated from elementary school in 1972. So now you know the difference between Charles and myself. And I really view Charles as one of my greatest mentor. So that's why I picked the title that a great inventor, exemplary inventor, educator, and I think everybody probably agreed with that, and also a mentor. I mean, that's particularly for me, for myself. And first, I really have to say that I know Charles longer than Charles knows me. Because when I was a student, a master's degree student, 1984, I started working on MBE at that time. And of course, I read a lot. And of course, I read work from L. Cho, and also I read a lot of papers from Charles too. As you probably know that when you are a student, okay, when you read papers, then you always think those real pioneers, and they can walk on water, you know, they are really, really smart, and how could they come up with all these ideas? And it's really, I think, I respect them. Especially, I must also say that at that time I was a student in China, okay, working on MBE. So I think I was one of the first master's degree student in China working on MBE. So, but I've never met any of those pioneers, so I really respect them greatly. And now this is actually a true story I've heard. So I hope that L can probably confirm that. Because when I was a student, I learned a story that, when China at that time, okay, in the 80s, 70s, China was kind of closed, and the communication with the outside world was very, very limited. So, but China did develop the MBE technology, mostly based on its own effort. And so I think in early 80s, I think El Chao was invited to visit China. And then the group in the Institute of Semiconductor presented a sample, MBE grown sample, to El Chao. And so El Chao didn't say anything. That's what I was told, okay, but at that time I was not a student yet. So El Chao just took the sample and used a microscope and look at the sample under the microscope. Then his comment said, indeed, this is an MBE sample. Okay, so that time the MBE growers in China, they didn't know. So how can someone just looking through a microscope at the sample surface that he can say this MBE sample rather than LPE sample or some other or just simple substrate with wonderful polish. And so they were really, really surprised. But later on, I told them, yes, okay, I saw an over defect. Okay, so this is MBE sample, right? So is there anyone? So now this is really, is a true story, right? So now I got to confirm, it's a real true story. And so now I keep telling this to all my students, year by year. I say, look, okay, you really need to be an expert. You should not even overlook defect. Okay, so sometimes that really help you to understand certain things. The first time I met Charles too was actually at a review, because I was a postdoc at that time after my PhD. And I was a postdoc at a UC Santa Barbara. And that time, I mean, that place is really a great place. So we heard a lot of story about Bell Lab. And because if you look at the UC Santa Barbara faculty members in early 90s, I think my boss that time, my advisor was Jim Mertz. And he played extremely important role in growing UC Santa Barbara. And he and Herb Kromer, a Nobel Prize laureate. So those two started in Santa Barbara early 80s. They recruited many colleagues from L and to Santa Barbara from all this. And I must say that actually Professor Yuhua Lo also from Bell Lab. So you see, my understanding is at that time, the best graduates, they always hired by Bell Lab, and then people will feel very sad if they cannot get a job offer from Bell Lab. So that time. And so they have a lot of Bell Lab people there, which includes, of course, Jim Merz, and Art Gossard, Larry Coldren, and Evelyn Hu, John Bowers, and many. It's a very long list. So sometimes people call it Bell Lab West. And so that was a review, and I think I still remember, it's OTC, it's Optoelectronics Technology Center, headed by Larry Coldren, funded by DARPA. So that was a review. That was the first time I said, oh yeah, I know who or how Charles Tu looked like, but I don't think that that time he know who I was. so that's the first time I met Charles Tu. And then I left Santa Barbara. I joined the Hughes Research Lab, and then I joined ASU 96. So after that, I was heavily involved with the North American MBE conference. So and I was the chair for the 2000. But then I really have very close interaction with him because I have to ask him for a lot of advice because that was the first MBE conference I chaired. And then after a few years, I joined the North MBE conference, the advisory board. And then almost we meet at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. So I really learn a lot. Now, the other thing I want to say that, as a faculty, that we probably know that one of the criteria to measure the success of faculty members is to look at his or her students. So I really know a lot of Charles Tu's students, probably just name a few of them. And for instance, one of them actually, we had a lot of overlap, and is Hong Ho, and he and I, we had an overlap. I think Hong Ho is somewhere there. Yeah, okay, yeah. So he and I, we had some overlap actually when we were a graduate student in China. So we shared one semester graduate course at the graduate college. And again, when we talk about Bell Lab, right? So when Hong Ho graduated, is a measure of his success. He was hired by Bell Lab. So at that time, I must say that time is very, very difficult to be hired by Bell Lab, because that time I think it was early 90s, right? It was 92, I believe. So that time Bell Lab already started to downsize, right? It's dramatically smaller than the peak time. So the Hong Ho was hired. And then, of course, subsequently, he was hired by San Diego National Lab. I heard a lot of story about that. So now he's an extremely successful entrepreneur, and it's a very, very impressive work coming from a Charles Tu group. And also, I know many other people like actually Patrick Ching. I think we organized a conference together, right? Patrick, you were at that time was TRW. Was that right? That time was TRW, but it's Northern Grumman that time. Also, Bing Wen Zhang, we worked together very briefly with the startup, and we also have very close interaction. And also, so many. There's another one. He's not here. He's a professor now in Tianjin, right? He joined HP labs, right? So now, from all these students, you know the quality of Charles' mentorship, then he can really guide them and bring them to such prestigious job positions. And so the last thing I also want to say that, so that was the wonderful, the great educator. So as a mentor, I really have to say a few things that, because I'm really focused on research. I'm not readily prepared to be a administrator, and one day someone from a very prestigious university from the East and called me up, say, hey, I'm a search committee chair, this person happens to be a very good friend of mine, so I want to recruit you to be our department chair. And I kind of get scared. I say, hey, this is wonderful, right? But I'm not really ready for that. So then I called Charles, I called a few friends. I say, hey, you have been chair for a long time. So what do you feel about this? I said, I really don't want to give up the research. Now I got this wonderful opportunity. So Charles is always very patient, and he told me all the stories, the pros and the cons. And so after serious consideration, I think I ended up I withdraw that application. But then later on, so at ASU, I was nominated to be the associate dean for research. That I couldn't say no, because I reject them already once. This is the second time they come to me. So I said, okay, I need to pay my due to my community. So again, I have to call Charles. Hey, could you give me some hints on how to survive, both, right? Not only to be a good administrator and nobody will complain about you, that during the same time, I would not give up my research. So thanks for his advice. Hopefully I survived that well. And also he wrote so many recommendation letters. Whenever I got some nomination or got a tenure, so I went to Charles, could you please a letter of recommendation. So clearly those letters probably play some important role. I got tenure and I also got a fellow, so all thanks to Charles too. So thanks Charles again for the mentorship in the past many years. Thanks.